Welcome! Today, we are going to tackle three words you hear all the time: ethnicity, race, and nationality. Now, they might seem pretty simple, but from a geographer's point of view, the way we usually use them in everyday conversation, well, it isn't quite right. And trust me, getting them straight is absolutely key to understanding the world around you. So let me just ask you, straight up, race, ethnicity, nationality. Could you right now confidently explain the difference between all three? It's a little tougher than it seems, right? We all tend to mix them up. But for geographers, these distinctions are critical because they literally shape where and how people live on this planet. Okay, so in this first part, we're going to do just that. We're going to untangle these terms. By the end of this section, you'll have a super clear, distinct definition for each one. Think of it as our foundation for understanding how these big ideas create the patterns that we see on the map. First up, ethnicity. Here's the key word to remember: culture. Ethnicity is all about your identity with a group that shares cultural traditions. We're talking language, religion, food, stuff like that. That all comes from a specific shared homeland. Geographers have a great term for this origin point: a hearth. So ethnicity connects you to a culture, and that culture is tied to a place. Next, we've got race, and this is fundamentally different because it's based on physical traits, with skin color being the most common one. Now listen closely, because the most important word on this entire slide is perceived. Race isn't about the culture you share, it's about how society views and categorizes your physical features. And finally, there's nationality. This one's probably the most straightforward of the three. It's your legal status. It's about citizenship, what country's passport you hold, where you can vote, your civic duties. It's a legal and political identity, plain and simple. Okay, seeing them all laid out side by side like this really makes the differences pop, doesn't it? Take a look. Notice how both ethnicity and nationality are place-based? They're tied to a specific location on the map, whether it's a cultural hearth or a country's borders. But race? According to geographers, it isn't tied to a specific place. And that little distinction, that's a really, really big deal. So let's dig into that idea a little deeper. Why isn't race considered place-based? Well, this leads us to one of the most important concepts in modern geography: the idea of race as a social construct. This quote here really signals a massive shift in scientific thinking. Today, geographers, biologists, you name it, they all agree there's just no reliable biological way to divide all 8 billion of us into a few neat little racial boxes. In fact, the genetic variation within any so-called race is actually far greater than the variation between them. So instead, race is understood as a social construction. What does that mean? It means that societies create racial categories. We, as a society, are the ones who decide which physical traits matter, and then we attach meaning to them. For instance, a century ago in the US, groups like the Irish or Italians weren't always considered white. That right there proves the category itself isn't fixed. It's built by society. Which, of course, brings up a very logical question. Okay, if race isn't some hard and fast biological reality, then why on earth do we spend so much time studying it in a geography class? And here is the crucial answer. Even though race is an idea, it has very real, very powerful consequences that shape the human landscape. It dramatically influences where people are allowed to live, the quality of their schools, their jobs, their safety. It creates spatial patterns of inequality that geographers can literally map out and analyze. So how does this actually play out in the real world? Well, let's take a look at how a country like the United States officially tries to count and categorize its incredibly diverse population by looking at the U.S. Census. Every 10 years, the U.S. Census asks people to check a box to identify their race from a list just like this one. It's a really fascinating process, actually, because these categories themselves change over time. And since 1997, you've even been able to select more than one box to better reflect a mixed heritage. And here we have a perfect, real-world example of these concepts in action. On the census form, there's a totally separate question about Hispanic origin. This is the government officially classifying Hispanic as an ethnicity, not a race. It means a person can be of any race: white, black, Asian, and also identify with the Hispanic ethnicity. But are these categories universal? Do other countries do it this way? Not even close. For a really powerful comparison that drives home this idea of social construction, let's jump over to Brazil. It's a completely different story.
In Brazil, the census takes a totally different approach. It asks people to classify themselves mainly based on their skin color. The main categories are branco for white, pardo for brown, and preto for black. This just goes to show you that these official systems of counting people are completely shaped by a society's own unique history and culture.
And when you map these identities out, wow, the spatial outcome is just stunning. There is a crystal clear geographic pattern here. Brazilians who identify as Branco are heavily clustered in the south of the country, a region that was historically settled by European immigrants. Meanwhile, those who identify as Pardo or Brown are concentrated way up in the interior north and the agricultural northeast.
The latest census from 2022 gives us this fascinating national breakdown. The population is almost evenly split between people who identify as white and those who identify as pardo, or brown. This really reflects the country's deep and complex history of ethnic and racial mixing, and it results in a national identity that's very different from what you see in the US.
All right, so we've defined the terms, we've untangled the big concepts, and we've even seen how they work in the real world. Now, let's bring it all together and answer that big so what question. Why is this stuff so fundamental to human geography? Here's one of the biggest takeaways for you. In our modern, globalized world, where everything can start to look and feel the same, ethnicity is an incredibly powerful counterforce. It acts as a bulwark, sort of like a defensive wall, that protects and preserves unique local cultures and traditions from being washed away. And that brings us right back to the core of what geography is all about. More than anything else, ethnicity is about a connection to place. It links a group of people, through their shared culture, to a specific part of the Earth's surface. That human-environment connection is exactly what makes this a fundamentally geographic concept. So, I'll leave you with a challenge. Now that you can clearly distinguish between ethnicity, race, and nationality, start looking at your own community through a geographer's eyes. How do these powerful labels and identities actively shape the spaces, the neighborhoods, and the landscapes that you see every single day?